resume the but yeah, so and then the second half of it, we're going to be talking about affordable housing and kind of the committee I've been sitting on for the last year, really year and a half, and they've brought forward some recommendations. So you're going to get a full presentation on the recommendations, and then I think there's going to be opportunity for questions there. So with that being said, Laura, do you have the ability to share your screen?
Yep, I will go ahead and do that now if you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then the other question I have is, do you, how much time, do you want me to like run through the presentation and then take questions afterwards? I'm thinking maybe 20, 25 minutes, if that works for you, right? Because I have an like 9:30 to 10:30.
Yeah. If you want to go that way, we can certainly go that way. And we can try to, if people put questions in the chat, we can try to capture some of those and keep track of that.
Let's see. All right, let me try to get to presentation mode here. Hang on a second. Okay, do you guys see full screen mode or no?
We did there for a second.
Problem is I need my notes. Hold on a second. Is that, can you see it?
Yes.
See most of it? I mean, does it take up? I think I see, hold on. Does that work? Is that a little bit better?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it, yep.
Okay. All right, let me go with that. All right, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for spending your Saturday morning with me and also with Sarah Showalter, also from Community Planning Development. Hopefully everybody's got a donut or a breakfast burrito or something you can munch on through this. My name is Laura Aldrete. I am the Executive Director of Community Planning and Development. And I really appreciate you asking me here, Ian. I appreciate the intent and the just the genuine feel of really establishing a relationship and being able to have a dialogue. So this morning I will be doing an overview of the department, and then I'll talk about some of the specific projects that we're working on. And then go into some Q&A. This is just the overview that we'll go through this morning. And just to go over our mission and organization, you know, it feels to me like we're soup to nuts, really, starting at the visionary large scale of city planning that's long-term and citywide, all the way down to construction inspections. And just, of course, want to note in the middle, we've got the preserve the function for whether it's culture, architecture, history, and part of that is obviously demolition review, but it's such a critical part of what we do. I just wanted to take a minute to reflect on oftentimes we are coming to the RNOs and talking to you all about our planning efforts and our whether it's neighborhood scale or citywide scale. The other part that we do is working with the development community, and just wanted to reflect on on what we have seen in particular over COVID. And while we have seen a slight reduction in the volume of permits, right? So permits that would allow for construction that you see here in 2020 and 2021, you do see it's a slight, it's a slight reduction in 20, about the same in 2021, but interestingly, in 2021, the dollar value started rising again. And that's really a reflection of in 2020, people, right, we all went home and stayed home. And then as we were working from home or being home and teaching from home, we realized we had all these remodel projects that we wanted to get done. So you see this volume, a pretty steady volume of projects or permits coming through, but they were smaller in scale because they were much more around housing remodel projects. In 2021, you start seeing the market come back and you start seeing larger multifamily office projects coming back. Hotel is the one sector of the industry that we have not seen come back quite yet to its previous state. So these are, this is how I think, this is how I've come into this position and thought about the kind of the critical buckets of areas that we need to focus on: equity, climate action, urban design, and then service. How do we function as a business unit, and how do we better serve our customers? So I'll just touch on a few of these. Some of them you're aware of on the equity piece, and I'll talk about the Infrastructure Investment Impact Fund a little bit later. That is a great initiative that really looks at how the city is, in areas where the city is using their dollars to do public investment, so public infrastructure. How are we potentially impacting displacement, and then how can we, what programs, whether it's through DIDO and NEST or it's through HOST, what kind of or Denver Human Services can we bring around that neighborhood to help stabilize and prevent displacement, even through the public dollar and public infrastructure programs, right? We want to invest in those communities, but we also don't want that to be the thing that pushes people out. So it's a really interesting program. We're partnered with Department of Finance on that. The Affordable Housing Review Team is a 5-year program that creates a completely separate swim lane for any project that is 100% affordable housing. So in the past, we just lump them, they're kind of lumped with any other project, but we have said affordable housing is a mission for us. And so if you, private sector or nonprofit, are out there teaming with us to help deliver on our mission, we're going to give you a separate swim lane. We're going to give you higher touch. So we're going to spend more time with you moving through our development process. And we are going to make sure that we're matching the volume that's coming in with the resources that we have available. Expanding housing affordability, Sarah Showalter will be talking about, and then I'll also talk in a moment a little bit more about advancing equity and rezoning. On climate action, we're really partnered with the Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resilience Department, and with us, we moved through the Energize Denver ordinance, which went through in the fall in November. So we adopted that through City Council, and it will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality in Denver over time. So this ordinance will require existing commercial building owners to partially electrify space and water heating as these systems are replaced starting in 2025. So it's a slow ramp up so we can continue working with the private sector, business owners, property owners about how to make that conversion. We also have to make sure we're working with the industry about making sure that the ability to do that is in place. So we don't want to replace a perfectly good gas system. So it's as replacement comes on moving forward, then we would want that property owner to choose an electric heat source, which can be powered with renewable energy in the future. On the energy code, second bullet there, Denver typically adopts the latest codes to ensure we stay at the forefront of building and safety and fire safety. So this year we'll be doing that in probably around June-ish time, summer. And it's the 2021 international codes. So they produce those, and then we look at how that those amendments that we need to add to that international code so that it reflects Denver's context, topography, climate, all those things. So we part of that is obviously advancing the energy efficiency, during this code adoption. And while, as I just mentioned, Energize Denver focuses on existing buildings, these codes will capture new construction, which is critical in order to achieve our goal for net zero energy construction in the coming years. So, and there's committees that are working with the industry to get that in place. On urban design, as hopefully you all got to participate in the outdoor dining program in your neighborhoods, we're looking to create codify a process that allows for that to be permanent. And it will be, those areas that are behind the curb, the parklets, which are essentially taking over, the ability for a restaurant to use a on-street parking area. So they're called parklets. And then in a couple special areas where it's deemed appropriate to be able to shut down a whole block or 2 blocks and remove cars completely and allow for it to be much more of a public realm for the people and not for cars. So that will, right now there's a temporary permit that is in place that all those businesses have till October of 2022. And then we'll just continue to work with them if they want to move into a permanent outdoor program, that we will help them transition into that process or into that program. Downtown Reimagined is something we're talking about. We recognize that downtown will be different in the future. It is certainly different today. And there's a couple different reasons why there's a tremendous, over the last couple of years, and it's become very evident in the last 2 years in particular, the different type of drug that's on the street right now has really taken over some of the homeless population and caused quite a bit of mental illness and severe addiction. And it's some of what you all have been seeing on the news, or if you're down there. So we're working with DPD and they're obviously in the lead here on what the immediate issues are. Part of it is interim. So we're working with the Department of Economic Development to begin bringing back retail into some of those empty retail ground floor spaces. And then long-term is where we really start to take into the lead and think about how do we change our thinking from a central business district to a central neighborhood district, and what kind of affordable housing and other amenities need to come in to really create a neighborhood downtown. And then lastly, we've been on this march to find a city urban designer who can really begin having those conversations at scale, whether it's at a neighborhood level or at a citywide scale, about who are we as an authentic city and as what is our authenticity in neighborhoods from a design standpoint, and how do we preserve and help bolster that? And then lastly, in the 2021, we created a customer service team, reorganized ourselves so that we are thinking about the customer first. And so this is more geared towards contractors and developers. And again, at scale, whether you are a contractor coming in for a house remodel, or you are a developer working on a multifamily, we are wanting to be able to serve our customers better and think about ourselves as engaging in that problem solving with them. Just kind of the other big pieces, we've always got to update our web pages, make them more accessible for the citizens, and then thinking about how do we work virtually and electronically. There's been some great things, just like this morning, you can be at home and doing a couple things, or don't have to worry about the drive. If you're not feeling well, you can stay virtual and we can still have this conversation. So making sure how we take the benefits of the few benefits that we had from COVID and move those into our community engagement or our customer service moving forward into the future. So let me talk about projects that are underway now. And specifically, so we've just kicking off the near southeast project. You see the neighborhoods here, really thinking about future decision makings around sustainability and preserving neighborhoods and equity, mobility. And then, so that project is just kicked off. We have a steering committee around that. There's a website here. And I think Christine, are you going to share? Hopefully Christine will share out this PowerPoint so that you'll have all these. I've got a number of different links. So you'll be able to go peruse those later.
Yes, I could share it here in the chat, but I think we'll put it in an email.
Okay, that's true. That's probably easiest too. Yeah, just different ways for people to access it. That's great. The other project we just kicked off is Near Northwest. This is in Councilwoman Sandoval's district. And we've begun meeting with residents and community groups since last summer. And we'll be going in with a virtual roundtable starting in March. And again, you can see the neighborhoods here. And then there's if you're in those neighborhoods, there's a web link. Also, we're looking at a 2023. So, we're still early in the process. So it's a great time to get involved in both of those planning projects. Two projects here on this slide I want to talk about. Oops. On this slide, one is the West Area Plan, so another neighborhood plan on the west side, and mostly in Councilwoman Torres's district. And we're coming in on 2 years on this. And of course, we had some disruption a little bit with COVID, so it's taken us a little bit longer. But we've got, we're close to a draft of the full plan. And we anticipate finishing that up, I would say Q2, early Q3 of this year. And then Park Hill Golf Course is another area plan, what we call small area plans. It's a neighborhood plan and small area plan are interchangeable, I would say, as terms. This is in the northeast part of Denver. And we spent 2020 working with the steering committee and a variety of other community engagement efforts to identify from the community where they would like to go with this project. And the effort last year was really about a binary question of do you want it just to remain as is and open space, or would you like to see something else that would include some type of mixed development? The prevailing vision from that conversation, both from steering committee, online surveys, open surveys, surveys with the immediate community with a mile radius around that property, as well as citywide community public meetings. I think those were the core. Community navigators. We had community navigators in that as well. Really making sure we are touching on multiple different aspects and parts of the communities around there. That prevailing vision really came back to say, we want a significant park and we want to see some affordable housing and a mix of housing. We would want to see as a community a stand up of an oversight committee that would help guide future planning and development. There was a lot of focus on and discussion about the tree canopy and combating urban heat island, youth and recreational sport opportunities, small opportunities for small local businesses and businesses owned by people of color. And then really a focus on strategies to mitigate involuntary displacement through that. So I'll just note that in November of 21, that election, voters decided how conservation easements can be partially or fully released in Denver. And there is a conservation easement on the golf course currently to remain as a golf course. So before the vote, any release of the easement had to be approved by city council only. After the vote, any release of council must be approved by city council and a majority of the Denver voters in a municipal election. So there's two moments at which both our elected officials and us as citizens can opine on whether a conservation easement should be released. So what that means is that Denver can continue to work with the community, the surrounding community, to build on the prevailing vision that's come out from 2021 and refine the shared priorities into a clear plan, and that voters and council can make an informed decision about the golf course in a future election. So we're going to continue to work on that effort with the community and through this year, and then it'll be, you know, multi-phased on the conversation with council and election. So also just want to note, as one of the things that we've, as part of our community engagement, we have really leaned in on expanding how we're thinking about doing that and testing new ways. We have hired a community engagement specialist in the past year, Mike Ramsey, who is working currently with schools, both at the elementary, middle school, or well, I should say elementary and high school levels, as it relates to the various neighborhood planning initiatives we have, so that we're making sure we're getting that voice of the youth in the plans, which, if you think about, we're making essentially these plans are going to be for them in their neighborhoods as they become adults. It's been really fun, and we've gotten some great ideas from them. And so that's that. And then I touched on the community navigators that we've added as well. So also just want to talk about the East Area Plan and what we're doing in terms of implementation here. It was adopted in 2020, in November of 2020, and was 3 years of working with residents in the East Colfax, Hale, Montclair, and South Park Hill neighborhoods. And we've already made some good headway on implementing these recommendations. And I just wanted to highlight them. I think one of the things we've really worked on in the last year is how do we take plans and help move them towards implementation. And so in terms of anti-displacement strategies, which was a large topic of conversation with the community on East Area Plan, we are working towards a policy that would, for a resident priority program, to give existing residents priority to new affordable housing units in their neighborhood, TIF advisory committee, new affordable housing requirements, and an adaptive reuse program to retain our small businesses along East Colfax. We established an investment impact fund in the city's budget. And I mentioned this earlier, where to increase the support for anti-displacement programs like financial empowerment services, funding for a community land trust, and increased funding for businesses impacted opportunity fund, which is a program run by the Department of Economic Development. It's called the Bio Fund. So it's really about us making sure we're continuing to work with the agencies that have the programs to actually implement those anti-displacement strategies. In terms of mobility, we're working to create safe crossings at about 20 intersections along 13th and 14th. Safe crossing and protected bike lane along 17th Avenue from Colorado to Yosemite, and pedestrian and transportation improvements to Quebec Street. So again, that's us making sure we do follow up with Dottie and continue to work with them on those as they move that closer to implementation. And then in terms of working with Councilwoman Sawyer and Councilman Herndon, they saw a couple neighborhoods have us real strong interest in ADUs. And so with their lead, we worked on a rezoning to allow homeowners in East Colfax to add ADUs to their properties. So I thought this hopefully could be a helpful slide. So I've really been talking about the top of the top of this triangle, and I think about planning and the work that we do as kind of this funnel, where at the top of the funnel is the citywide plans, comp plan 2040, blueprint Denver. And then we've really been spending time on these small area plans, the stationary plans, major projects, and those still, both of these two top tiers are plans that are guidance to the city, and they require adoption by city council. I want to move now into the next layer down of detail, which is zoning. So regulatory zoning that we do and building codes, and that could come in as text amendments that we do, like, for example, group living or the expanding housing affordability. Those are text amendments that change the wording in the code. A map amendment is changing what their zoning is in a specific location. So so that's a rezoning that a new property owner might bring into the city. Again, that goes through a city council process. All of those have a range of public meetings and, of course, the public hearing either at planning board and at city council. And then once you get past that rezoning and building code adoptions, then it moves into the rules and regulations, design standards, permits, things that are administrative through our staff. So I'm now just going to talk about that box of zoning and building code. So 3 particular text amendments that we are looking at, and one is well into this process, and the other 2 are just starting. And the expanding housing affordability is what Sarah will talk about in greater detail in the next hour after me. But right, I think all of us feel the pinch, or we have family and friends who are feeling the pinch of housing, and you see it in your neighborhood. It's on the news, and that Denver needs, essentially Denver needs more housing that the average person can afford. And that's what this project is all about, ensuring that as new homes are built, so are affordable housing homes. And so within the city, we have a number of initiatives working to support people with the lowest incomes right now. We also need, what we also need is housing for our workforce, which is what the expanding housing affordability effort really focuses on. Teachers, firefighters, restaurant workers, people who make our city great, a place that we love, that we are proud of, and yet are struggling to find affordable housing. So the answer to affordable housing isn't simple. This is one element of a toolkit that we have, that we are hoping to add to with the expanding housing affordability. But it does include making sure that new housing developments include options that are attainable for all people working at a wide range of jobs. And by including more affordable and market rate housing in the same developments, we're creating a mixed income communities across the city, as opposed to separating them into different areas. And if you think about, the 15-minute city, which Paris has done, which we have in our Blueprint Denver. I mean, Paris has made an announcement about it. We have made an announcement in our Blueprint Denver for the complete neighborhoods. What's great about our neighborhoods is that we have a coffee shop and restaurants and businesses in our neighborhood, and we want to make sure that those workers can also choose to live in that neighborhood, and have the ability to commute by foot or by bike, and not having to drive to arrive to some affordability further out. So Sarah, as I mentioned, Sarah's going to spend a lot of time on this and go into great detail on it. Advancing equity and rezoning. This has been a conversation since for quite some time, and we're happy to be able to kick this project off. It really aims to refresh the rezoning process and criteria. It will focus on supporting Blueprint Denver's equity goals for more transparency and greater public input, which we hear time and time again, and so I think that's why we're excited to be able to advance this and kick this project off, which happened just before, I think in early December, we kicked this project off. So this will be text amendment. So this won't rezone any projects, but it will improve process people in neighborhoods go through as rezonings are proposed in their communities in the future. So some things that may come out of this and will be part of the conversation will be creating a more transparent and understandable process to the citizens, to RNOs. incorporating meaningful notification and awareness of rezonings, providing different opportunities for engagement, and calibrating rezoning fees. Oops, I might be stuck on a, oops, sorry, I didn't realize. So this is the advancing equity and rezoning that I just talked about. I apologize, the slides got stuck. The other project I just want to note is the ADUs in Denver. Is a project that just started. I think our steering committee is beginning next week with their first meeting. And the foundation for this project is also in Blueprint Denver, which included recommendations for ADUs around barriers to ADU construction that need to be removed, and then zoning rules that be reviewed and adjusted so that ADUs fit into a variety of neighborhood contexts. Because as we know, there are a lot of different types of neighborhoods in Denver. And so they need to be, these ADUs, when they're zoned into the neighborhoods, need to be contextual. So as this graphic shows, it's more about where should this ADU fit based on the type of neighborhood that it is being proposed in. As opposed to, again, it's not saying that we are not going to identify locations of where, if there's zoning that allows it, this is going to be applicable there. So that's going to be the conversation. Let's see if let me just think here if I forgot anything on this, how they're designed, how they'll fit into the different contexts. Yeah, I think that's pretty close. I'm almost done here. This is a project that we just completed. Actually, last week we had a filming reveal and final community meeting. I think Thursday evening. It's the first of its kind in Denver for sure, and it's part of, certainly again part of Blueprint Denver and recognizing that we want to preserve the diversity in our city, and really focusing on a concerted effort to go deeper into our community outreach, to listen and to advocate for policies and programs along that align with our community values. So in 2019, we updated the city ordinance that governs historic preservation to include cultural significance as a worthy and relevant criterion, in addition to previously it would have been around architecture and the value of that architecture. Last year, CPD started working on another first of its kind initiative in our city to recognize, celebrate, and protect historic places of our Latino, Chicano, and Mexican American communities. And the intent is, so we just completed it. Here's the film and which is great. It's a 30-minute documentary that is fantastic. I would highly recommend that, viewing it. There's also the report that's about 250 pages that has a lot of detail in it. But the intent is really, this is the first one we have done, and we are looking at, we've applied for grants to move on to a second one. And hopefully we would start that, as soon as those grants come in, maybe at the end of this year or into 2023. But we, it's just, it's been a fun project and fun to see the community participate in that and learn so much about Denver. So I'll just finish with this slide as resources. This is what I just wanted to make sure you're going to have access to this PowerPoint. So the major development projects link will show all new major commercial and multifamily developments that are under city review now or that have been reviewed in the past. And there's map layers in there, so you can turn off an older layer so you can just see what projects are under review right now. We understand that's a lot of community members are asking for that, and so so anyways, this is the first link to get to, and then you can play with the different layers. The next one is building and zoning permits. They're now all issued electronically in Denver. So these records are available in this database through this link, and you can access that database through this. And there's also, we included instructions and videos if this is the first time using e-permits, so that you can understand how to walk through that process to go and research different addresses that or your own address if you're wondering where you are in the process of your home remodel. And then if you have a question about your specific property, about like from a zoning standpoint, am I in a historic district or am I in a floodplain? This third link will help get that information to you. And it's also has contact information for our city inspectors and engineers who serve your address. So again, just hopefully these are helpful tools for you to maneuver the city process and the CPD process. So with that, I understand, I realize I went a little bit long here, but with that, I will open it up for questions. Do you want me to, yeah, I guess I'll leave it
great.
on.
Great, thanks so much. I think I had a question just kind of to start. Just curious, like what your overall budget is for CPD and how many employees you all have?
Yeah, so in the 2022 budget, it's 36 million. And we lost 14% of our staff through the pandemic. And we, for a year and a half, could not hire during the pandemic because of budget restrictions. Loss of tax revenue, essentially, is what that means. So in August, we began with ARPA dollars, we began being able to just backfill those empty positions. And then through the 2022 budget process, we have added some new positions as part of that. So, before the pandemic, we were close to 300. I would say we're somewhere around 260 right now. I mean, we cannot hire fast enough. And, there's a lot of conversation about just the movement of people. So we've lost some people, we're trying to hire new people. If anybody's looking for a job and wants to get involved and help us solve, makes Denver great, I would highly encourage going to our HR website. We're looking for great city planners who love our city. So,
well, thank you for that, Laura. I appreciate it. I think we will go to questions. Cindy, I see you have your hand up. I did see there were a couple of questions in the chat, so I don't know if you all want us to read those or if you want to raise your hand. Gertie, I'm guessing you want to raise your hand. So why don't you go ahead, Cindy?
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. That really helps, because a lot of times we don't know what's coming up. So my question is about readaptive use. We're hearing lots of things that our landfills are filling up very quickly. And if we just look at the demolition permits and things going on in the past, there has been a lot of tear down and reimagining, I guess is the nice word, neighborhoods. But it's changing the whole structure of neighborhoods. I noticed you said you are going to hire a person who is a city planner that would look at neighborhood characters and what we need to do. But what are you doing about the low tonnage fees that developers are charged, or that, whoever is charged, to put all of these scrap materials into our landfills? How are we going to stop this or slow it down?
Yeah. So Cindy, great. It's a great question. And we have been looking at that for some time. And we know the most sustainable thing we can do as a city is preserve our existing buildings, as opposed to your point, tearing that down, throwing all that material into the landfill and starting with new materials. So in the 2022 budget, I requested and received from the mayor and city council a position specifically set up to help facilitate the conversion, the adaptive reuse of existing buildings into new uses. Oftentimes there are developers, smaller developers, and who see the beauty in an old building and want to use it. And we have not been necessary. We've been pretty onerous in our process to help facilitate them moving from one use to an adaptive new use. And whether that is in the zoning code, as well as in our rules and regulation building code. So we actually just hired, she'll start on Monday, a person to build a program that will create a separate review process just for that adaptive reuse. Because previously currently we put them in the site development plan process, which is everything from a triplex to a 40-acre parcel, right? So they just get in this, they go through the machinations, and this is just a guy who's, a developer who's trying to do one building and gets super frustrated, and it's just cost prohibitive at some point to them. So we recognize that, and we want to preserve that authenticity of those old buildings. And so we're starting a program. So I think it'll take us this year to build the program and then institute it starting in 2023. So, we are going as fast as we can. We were really pleased that we had the support. This, came up a lot in East Area Plan, and I think council started recognizing the importance. We need to be able to clear the hurdles, right, to help facilitate that. So that's exactly what we're doing this year.
Thank you for that. And Cindy, I just want to, I put in the chat here, there is a ballot initiative I helped bring this November, that Waste No More, that has a section in there about construction recycling. So I think that's a concern that's been shared by a lot of people over the years. And Laura, thank you for that position. Being a trustee of Historic Denver, I know we do a lot of that work of trying to work with people about adaptive reuse. So I think it's great to see the city taking that on.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know if you know Jenny Budenborg, but it's somebody from our historic preservation team who is going to lead that effort. So it just makes perfect sense.
Great.
To have her lead that.
So are you good, Cindy, to move on to the next person then?
Yes, I just wanted to say that to have some sort of threshold like the historic preservation process has, to hold everyone accountable from tearing down things would be the best. So thanks.
Gertie, I see you're next.
Thank you. And Laura, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. My question relates to the outdoor eating areas that were put in by executive order or permission from the mayor. And many of those involved outdoor eating areas that are very close to residential uses. And I am wondering, will there be, with that being made permanent, will there be the opportunity, will there still be hearings in front of excise and license, therefore the opportunity to expand existing good neighbor agreements to cover those expansions, because it would really be helpful to be able to do that?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. That excise and license process that has the hearing will be in place. I believe we shortened during COVID. We shortened the notice period, and during COVID, everybody was just happy to be out. So I think we had one complaint that I know of from a neighbor on a business, and we got them together and they worked it out. But we're going, we think, God willing, we're going back into some normalcy. And so making sure that our process that we're setting up for the permanent brings back those established processes for excise and license. Obviously fire, we've got to make sure fire's in there. They always are in there. Our building inspectors, any kind of zoning pieces, will still have to check all those boxes, kind of going back to this is how it was before. So if that's helpful, CPD is leading that effort, but our partners, right? We have to have excise and license where we have fire is in there as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Miles, I see you put a couple of questions in the chat. I didn't know if you wanted to. Yeah, go ahead, Miles.
Thank you, Laura, for the presentation. So based on Blueprint Denver, can you tell me if the advanced equity and rezoning is basically what is talked about in Blueprint Denver about allowing multifamily redevelopment across all single family zoning in the city?
So it is not going to look at that, and you know, there is conversation about that, and I would call it, infill, residential infill. I think is kind of what you're mentioning. I think when you say multifamily, I think you're meaning kind of that small scale, 2 to 4 unit housing that would be reflective in context, in form, to look like to mirror the single family housing that it's in. I think that could be, a recommendation that comes out of it, but it by itself, the equity and rezoning will not address that or solve for how to implement that type of infill, that 2 to 4 missing middle infill in single family.
So, but it could be brought to city council as a policy change.
Well,
As
yeah,
a recommendation, because a policy change would in effect be the beginning of city council voting on removing single family housing.
Yeah, it could, when I say it could be a recommendation, what it would mean is that go study that, go do a public process with that, right? Go look at what that regulatory language would look like in order to allow it. But it's got to come, that voice is got to come from the people. And so we can't move it. If I was planning czar, I would be like, yeah, I love that idea. But I can't do that, and I shouldn't do that. It's got to be part of a larger conversation with the community. There has been enough pushback on that we don't believe, and we don't believe council would be supportive of it right now. And so but I think these kind of conversations about equity, like bringing it up as a part of equity in rezoning, is a great thing to have a conversation about it. So I just want to be clear, like, I think you could, if there's enough community support in the process of equity in rezoning to say, hey, this is something we need to look at, then your council people will hear you. And then the council people will tell us, hey, you got to take this on, because there's enough of our community that wants to talk about and look at this and address this issue. And then we can move forward. But I think there's got to be this first push. It's certainly suggested in Blueprint Denver. There's different sides of that conversation right now. And so it's important for you and others who might have that interest to participate in equity and rezoning, to be able to begin saying, this matters to us. We want to bring this into a larger conversation and solve for it. But just to be clear, it's a separate conversation. Like, it would be a separate effort.
Okay, because I think that's a big change. Okay, let me do one follow-up question. So I live in a house over 100 years old, a Denver Square, a block away from Colfax. During the ECAP process, the planner basically told me it doesn't make sense that single family homes like mine exist adjacent to a new transportation corridor. And what he said was it would make sense to replace all of these homes with apartment buildings. What is the planning department? Is that kind of the direction the planning department is going, that my single family house should just be rezoned and torn down and replaced with apartments? Is that kind of the direction CPD is going with this?
Yeah. So we're not going to advocate for anything to be torn down, right? And it's not up to us. And I, without the community's support and without the council's support, we would never move a legislative rezone. We don't move zoning forward. It is the council that moves legislative. So your council person would have to say, I want all this rezoned. I think that if I had to guess, one, Colfax is not a new transit corridor. It is the second highest performing transit corridor in the city. It is a fantastic already existing transit corridor. I think it's the idea of moving it into a BRT that would create even a more efficient transit corridor. I think in a purist perspective of if you had a transit corridor and you were going to plan everything new from the beginning, yes, you would have higher density along that corridor, and you would for sure increase that density at transit nodes, right? Every time there was a stop, you'd want a little bit more density and more mixed use, because those are just great activity centers, right? Those are people moving and in and out along the corridor, coming onto the bus, the BRT. But here's the thing, cities are messy, and we've got layers of 150, thankfully we have layers of 150 years of figuring out who we are. And so, I would guess that planner was speaking more in a perfect world, we would have increased density, but, getting from where we are today, I mean, I don't know that it bodes us any benefit to demo, we would never actualize or initiate the demolition of a house for rezoning. That's got to come from the community. That's got to come from council. It's got to come from the property owner. It's not us driving that. We are the mechanism.
And I'll end here. Just please remember the context and history of the city is reflected in the architecture. And as the city or as CPD moves forward and rezones and is looking at increasing density, the fabric of the city is the architecture. And if you start allowing the redevelopment of the architecture, you change and lose the history of the city. So it's a big piece. The people moved into the neighborhood because of the homes and the context. And I almost just project forward and see the city basically saying build apartments on every single lot across the city. We want to increase density. It will no longer be the same Denver. And you're going to lose a lot of what the history of Denver. And I think that's important. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I will just say, I think architecture is one element of the fabric. I think there are multiple layers of what makes a good city. I also will say what makes a good city is an evolving city. And so we will always be in this tug of how do we preserve and how do we keep our city authentic and how do we continue to advance? Sprawl is not the answer. Figuring out how to grow smartly and densify smartly I believe is the answer. And so it feels like that maybe you think that Denver is trying to clear everything and do all high rise. I don't think that's what we're trying to do. We are always juggling a balance of how do we preserve and keep authenticity, as well as how do we evolve into the 21st century. We're a quarter of a century in already. So thank you for that comment.
I think we have time for just a couple more before we let
Ian?
Sarah go.
Can
Loretta,
I jump in, Ian?
Oh, you want to jump in, Christine? Go ahead.
Well, there's two things. I see several areas of questions in the chat that I think maybe we need to have the advancing equity task force speak next time. I think that's really important. I have a bunch of questions on it, whether the name really should be advancing equity in the zoning code versus the rezoning process, but let's save all those. I just thought Drew and Cindy both had one question, the same question for Laura that I thought was important way up at the beginning, which is how does the city plan to make up for its deficit in parks and open space? We can't do it through pocket parks. And we're really losing on that. And I think we should also have that question as a separate meeting, but could you answer that, Laura?
Sure, I'll start with that. And so we're happy to come back at your request to talk specifically about advancing equity and rezoning. I would also say for a separate conversation on parks, that seems appropriate as well. Let's tag team it with parks, or maybe parks is the lead on that. But again, I'm not trying to get out of it, but just we work in tandem with them because they're thinking about it every day. We are always cognizant about the relationship, especially as we densify, right? We need to make sure there are open space and there's access to open space as we create density and additional housing in our city. And so we, in particular, for example, we have the large development review program or process that anything that's over 5 acres, any redevelopment that's over 5 acres has some requirements to aggregate open space. So not breaking it into small pocket parks, to the comment question. And I'm sorry, I haven't looked at the chat. So I haven't seen the questions. So thank you for fielding them. So that is one area, right, where you start having enough area to do a redevelopment. So it used to be 10 acres. We've now said, no, at 5 acres, we need to start having that conversation about how do you aggregate open space and do it in a meaningful way in relationship to the development that's happening as a part of that. But then also, how are we making sure that the neighborhoods around that 5 acre or greater development is also getting access in, right? Do they have a safe way to cross? If it's a large arterial, do those neighborhoods have a way to cross in and be able to use that new park? That new park shouldn't be just for that development. It should be for everyone.
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you for that. I think the chat is worth reading, but I think we need to move on, Ian.
Can we get our president just one last question in here? I think that would be nice. Loretta, Laura, I think you might know Loretta, but she's the president of INC. I'd love to give you a chance to ask the last question, Loretta.
Hi, my question is this, and this is pretty, a question across the city, and especially for those of us in Baker, it's come up a lot, but I know it's probably come up for everybody. We've seen with, small additions, small renovations on homes, people have been putting in their permitting process, and, and I can speak from experience, we permitted and landmark because we're a 130-year-old home, over 130 years. So we've gotten permits and we've gotten feedback on, landmark was approved, whatever, people in our neighborhood are getting this. And as a 130-year-old home, we are asked to do things that seem inappropriate for a home that old. So we are trying to work with people about that. I have a crawl space that might be 6 inches. And so similar people in our neighborhood have come up with things that they've had to do that have been like big ask just to do a small project on their home. And so, and that's an equity issue because you're talking about, old homes and trying to do things. And if somebody's elderly or moderate income, they can't afford to do things. And now we're asked to replace our sidewalks. So this is a major issue that I think everybody in the city might want to know is to ask to replace 165 feet of sidewalk to do a 200-foot addition on a home. But we've seen this across the neighborhood that they're asking to replace sidewalks now just to do an addition. We're asked to do vapor barriers to do things that are impossible on a 130-year-old home. So, I mean, is there some kind of, I don't know if there's new people who are coming back and telling us these things but we're just trying to look at this and, there's other things. We have we're also working on a conservation overlay that we've been looking for 2 years for an ADUs, and that's been difficult also, but But if you can speak a little bit to those requirements.
Yeah, so I think you've got a couple things. One, in terms of the vapor, that may be, you know, it may be a conversation between LPC and building, the plan review group and residential. So, I mean, I would just say, you know, maybe we can talk offline if you've got if there's something on your house in particular. On the sidewalk issue, that is a policy across the city that comes from the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. And really it's about really thinking about how do we make sure that we have a walkable city. Besides, this is the first time I've heard of it in a historic district, but certainly small affordable housing nonprofits are also struggling with this because it is a cost a cost increase. And most times you weren't thinking about it, right? You were just, from a budget standpoint, you were just thinking about the improvement to your home. There is I know Dottie the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure has been looking at a way to offset that cost, because we do believe that sidewalks are important and accessible sidewalk, right? ADA, functioning sidewalks are accessible, are in place. And so it's an important piece that we continue to implement throughout the city. It's challenging, but I hear you. And so is there equity in requiring every homeowner to do that? Or, the other cases I mentioned is small affordable housing nonprofits are struggling to underwrite that. And then on the ADUs, that's, I'm assuming you're speaking with your council person about that.
Yeah, we've been working for years. So, I mean, and this is the thing, because as a council person, other neighborhoods might not want ADUs. Could ask Gertie about that, but Baker has been open because we've had them since I don't know if you guys are, but we're like since the 30s, we've had ADUs, right? Because there's been infill across the neighborhood. So, but I think, that's another thing to be taken offline maybe. But I think the issue is that we're seeing residents having to replace sidewalks, whereas like pre-COVID, we didn't see that as much. And so it seems new, but maybe I'm wrong, but
it's completely irrelevant of COVID. It existed before that, but
maybe it's more enforced now or something, or I don't know. But we've just seen some new things that have been, for those of us who live in the central kind of older neighborhoods, it's like coming up with things that have been, seems difficult for older homes. So I think I tag Miles on that, is like taking into consideration the historic fabric of homes and historic neighborhoods of not requiring things that are almost prohibitively expensive.
Well,
Ian, I feel like you came on camera to tell me to stop talking.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you being here. I think it's amazing. There are some questions here in the chat. I think we'll gather those up, and if you could get them answered, I think that'd be wonderful. And we just can't thank you enough for coming here, and again, building a relationship as we move forward. We always have CPD staff here, so it's great to have you here too. And so we really appreciate that, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks. I'll probably hang out and just listen to the next presentation if that's okay. Just curious about the questions, but also want to thank everybody again. Thank you for the invitation, Ian and Christine, and look forward to continuing to dialogue.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're gonna switch to our next topic. We have Sarah Showalter on. Sarah, I saw you jump in. Want to make sure you're able to share your presentation.
Yeah, let me give that a shot here.
So Sarah's here to talk with us about the Expanding Housing Affordability Task Force. Recommendations have been made, and so this is your opportunity to give feedback on the draft. And so we're happy to have you back again. And you have a crowd here that knows a lot about it because we've had this at committee a bunch of times.
That's great. Are you guys seeing the shared screen okay?
Yep, and feel free to get started whenever you want.
Okay. Great, thanks for having me this morning. So I do want to know, I think you already know this because she's been with you several times, but Annalise Hoke on our team is the expert and has been doing all the hard work on this project together with Brad Weinig and Host. Host is an important partner in this as well. And they both had conflicts today, so I'm filling in, and Jennifer Biess is here from Host to fill in because this is really important for Host as well. But just wanted to give you the heads up that there may be some questions that we can't answer since we're not the experts, but we'll do our best today. So I think a lot of you probably already aware, since like Ian said, Annalise and Brad have come to this committee before, and I know you've been tracking this project really closely. We just released a public review draft after having a public policy proposal out in late 2021. We got a bunch of public comment on that, made some revisions. And so that's where we are in our process, and wanted to share with you what the policy proposal is at this time. So I think it's really helpful to give some context, to take a step back to the Denver housing market back in 2000. The median household income was $40,000. And you can, you're probably already aware, without me showing you the numbers that are coming next, that the home prices and rents were significantly lower than they are today. But what was also really important back in 2000 is that Denver's household incomes were keeping pace with the cost of housing, whether renting or buying. And the way the national standard for measuring that is that you do not spend more than 30% of your income on your housing costs. And in general, Denver was doing much better with that in 2000. So then you fast forward to today, the median household income is $84,000, and the median home price is significantly higher, as is the rent. So you can see here. And what's most concerning is that although incomes have increased, the increase in housing costs has been significantly higher. And I think many of us, if not personally, then at least we know others in our lives in Denver that this is having a huge impact on. So our incomes are not keeping pace with these drastically rising housing costs. And we know that more than 115,000 households, or 35% of our population, are spending more than the 30% of their income that should go to household costs. And obviously that creates a huge burden for those households. So when our housing is not affordable for our community, it creates a lot of challenges for us. Exacerbates inequities between different income levels. It becomes harder and harder for those at lower income levels to keep up and increase their earning power and have a stable life. It means that overall it hurts our economy in the whole region because workers are much harder for them to move here. And that creates a lot of challenges to our workforce and our economic growth. It also means a lot of people have to move to more affordable housing markets and then have longer commutes to get to their jobs. So this is obviously a huge problem, and I would hope that this group, because I know you're very educated in the loop on a lot that's going on, are probably already aware of a lot of the tools that the city already has in place. A lot of city dollars and programs going to create the affordable housing that Denver needs so badly. You can see here on the slide some of the stats, and Jennifer can share more about if there's questions on that. Some of the different programs and work that Host, our housing department, does every day to try to get more units built in Denver. But what we're really going to talk about today is not so much the city funded work that's happening, but how we can complement that with other tools to get more affordable housing in Denver. So we need the development industry, not just the city, to be part of the solution to meet our affordable housing needs. And that's the only way we'll be able to serve the workers that are vital to our community. Some of our most essential workers that we all depend on every day, you can see their income levels here, and there's a huge gap in housing affordable to them at these income levels right now. So given that, we have a new policy proposal this year, although like I said, there's already been one version of it last year, and so now we're just refining it. But the basic concept is that as new development happens, affordable housing will be built with that market rate housing at the same time. And that will be accomplished through a mandatory housing program that requires the construction of affordable housing, that's also paired with incentives to try to get even more affordable housing built by the private market, as well as an update to the linkage fee that we already have. For those who may not know, the linkage fee is the term we use for, there's a legal nexus, they call it, which is acknowledging that as new construction happens in the city, new jobs come in, commercial offices are built, new housing is built, and the construction jobs associated with that, that generates demand for affordable housing and the need for those workers that are going to fill those spaces to have affordable housing. And so we've had a linkage fee in place for quite some time, and we'll be revising it as part of this project. So I'm going to walk you through kind of different, all development in Denver is going to contribute in some way, but depending on the type of development it is, how it contributes to building more affordable housing will vary a little bit. So for residential projects that are less than 9 units, they will pay the linkage fee. And then that linkage fee money goes into the affordable housing fund and is used to generate new affordable housing units throughout the city. And then office, retail, industrial, and hotel will also pay a linkage fee. And same thing, that money will then get used to build affordable units that are needed throughout the city. For all residential development that is 10 units or larger, that's where the mandatory housing kicks in, so that they have to either set aside some of the units in that very project to meet certain affordable levels. There's some alternative compliance that they can do for that. And then, like I mentioned before, there's also incentives so that we try and encourage them to build even more than the mandatory minimum required. And this is one of the main reasons we're doing this project, in addition to updating the linkage fee, is because state law changed. For many, many, many years in Denver, decades in all of Colorado, there was very strict rules around requiring affordable housing as part of market rate development that prohibited us from doing that. And last year, I know at least some people on this call were part of the movement to get the state to pass this, and it was very exciting for the state to give municipalities like Denver the option to do mandatory housing. And so this is a big new tool that we've been able to add to our toolbox just recently. So to give you a sense of what this would actually look like, this new tool, because we've had the linkage fee in place for a while, just wanted to walk through a couple of examples. And so why this is really unique compared to what we've been, the situation in Denver for decades, is as market rate housing is built, new affordable units will be integrated into the same project so that you have affordable and market rate in the same project, which we call mixed income housing. So what this could look like, here's an example. If somebody's building 200 new apartments in Denver, under that particular proposal of 200 units, the developer would have different options. One is to build the units on site. And we have done a lot of financial feasibility to model this in a way and propose numbers that we're hopeful most developers will choose this option because our number one goal is to get units built and have them be part of a mixed income community. But there is an option to pay a fee in lieu. And that money would, similar to the linkage fee, if you pay the fee in lieu, then that money would go to build affordable units throughout the city. The financial feasibility behind the fee in lieu is and we've had developers test this and confirm a lot of them with the proposal we have would choose to build units on site. Not everyone will, but a lot will, because it's financially incentivized that way for them. So an example of what that could look like for this 200 unit project, there's actually 2 options you can choose from for building units on site. One is 8% of the units would have to be affordable to 60% of the area median income, which is what AMI stands for. And did want to note that's for typical markets. So that's how it'd be across almost all of Denver. There are a couple areas where the market is very different. We're calling them high cost markets, like downtown, where even more affordable units will be required. The rents and land costs in those areas enable them to financially fit more affordable units in and still have it be feasible. So just know that in your mind, the examples would be a little different if you were somewhere like downtown, but for most of Denver, this would be the requirements. So with 8% of the units at 60% AMI, that would mean that of the 200 units, there'd be 16 units that would have to be affordable to a 2-person household earning less than $50,000 a year, which is a significantly lower than the market. And this is an example of what that might mean for one family. To help give some perspective on area median income and what it means to be at 60% or 80% of that area median income, I'll just stop here for a minute and let you take a look at the slide. It gives you a sampling of some of the jobs I mentioned earlier that are critical in Denver, where our workforce is falling. You can see a lot of them, especially when they have just one person earning an income is significantly below the area median income. And so these are the, gives you a sense of the different workers that will benefit from the income levels being built by this mandatory housing program. So a second option would be to do 12% of the units. So this is a higher percentage, and then you can average across all the affordable units to reach 70% of AMI. So in this case, the units are not quite as low in their affordability, but you get more of them. So you, out of the 200 units, 24 would be affordable for a 2-person household earning up to 63,000. So there's 2 different examples here of who that could serve. For this family, it'd be less than $79,000, and this couple less than 31,000. Then on top of that, as I mentioned, that would be a requirement. That's what James, the developer, would have to build. He'd have to pick one of those 2 options. But we also are proposing incentives, such as a reduction in the permit fees that are paid to go through the construction permitting process, lower parking requirements, as well as building, allowing you to build a slightly taller building. If you get one of those incentives, then you have to increase the number of affordable units that will be built. And then the state law requires us to provide alternatives. So we are not enabled by the new state bill to just require you to build units on site. And that's why I mentioned earlier, there is a fee in lieu option. So James could take that option. And in this case, for a 200 unit development, it would mean paying $4 million to the Affordable Housing Fund. So that is another option. So this is the summary here. It will create significantly more units being built in Denver. As I mentioned before, it'd be for any residential project, 10 units or larger. We'll have to follow the options that I just walked you through. It also has a 3-year gradual increase to our linkage fee that's already in place that will apply to all other development types. So residential projects less than 10 units, as well as industrial, commercial, and hotel will pay increased linkage fee. And then the incentives that I mentioned before will be put on top of the affordable housing requirement. So in terms of our process, like I mentioned, we've already been doing a lot of outreach and have been to this committee before, as well as many other community groups, and hosted our own community meetings. Right now, you can go to our website. We did, Annalise shared with Christine. So I'm happy to send them out if needed, but I think Christine has them, can maybe share them with you as well. We have a robust website where you can get lots of information. You can read get as detailed as you want to the full red line draft, or we have a great summary document, a policy proposal that walks you through a little more detail than what I just gave you. And through March 14th, we are asking for community input. We hosted a community meeting last week. We're doing a bunch of office hours, which you can find on our website, and you get time to talk directly with our experts like Annalise and ask questions. So encourage people to participate in that and give us your comments. And then we'll move into the legislative review process for public adoption, which would mean going to planning board and then Denver City Council for the final approval, which right now is anticipated to be in June. So that is the presentation we have. And then, like I mentioned before, Jennifer and I can help answer some questions y'all have.
Thanks, Sarah. I see several questions in the chat. I don't know if people want to raise their hand and say them. Christine, I see you're first, so go ahead.
Well, I didn't see any other questions, and I really agree with the goal of mixed income in the same building. I think that's key, and I think it's hard to achieve. But I am concerned because I saw the Zaccolo's thing on Sloan's Lake, where he just put everybody on the lake for the really nice luxury units and built a separate building still on his property. I would like to, that was for what was called the poor doors, the affordable housing. They did the same thing at Mercy years ago. And I want to make sure that that's excluded. Or I want to ask if that's excluded under this proposal. And I also want to ask, I mean, having incentives after we just won the state permission to require affordable units and rentals, I guess I'm still stuck on why the incentives are so key and when they start and why we're giving away extra height in order to get more units when it would not require new zoning. So those are my questions.
Sure. So for the your first question about separating the units, yes, in general, that is prohibited. So like I was explaining kind of and showing those visuals in the slide, like the requirement is that when you build the units, they need to actually be interspersed into the market rate units. And host has requirements to make sure that the units are similar. So like, for example, you wouldn't, if you have a market rate development with 200 units, like the one that I was just showing on the slides, and you have, 50% of them are 2 and 3 bedroom, then you can't make all of the affordable ones studios. You have to have a similar mix. So it's not just that they're interspersed in the project, but also that you have kind of an equitable approach to how they're spread throughout and the options that are available. So I want to be clear, there are some situations, especially for a really large development, which in this policy proposal, and again, you can find that online to read a little more detail about it, includes high impact development, so 10 acres or larger, for example, that will be expected to do more than just the standard minimum housing requirement that all developments doing. And as part of that, there'll be negotiated agreements, and there may be some really large sites that decide to, for example, take a parcel and make it a very low income, like tax credit project. So I want to be transparent, like there will still be some situations in which you can meet the requirements of this program overall and still have some like standalone affordability. But in general, the vast majority of what's going to get built under this program would not be able to do the situation you described where the low income is separated out. And then for, oh, sorry, did you say something?
The second part of my question, just.
Yep, for incentives. So incentives are something we see, there's a lot of other cities in the United States that have had a mandatory housing program in place, sometimes for decades, certainly in the last 10 years, because it's such a common tool to use to make sure that you're meeting your affordable housing needs in big cities like Denver. And it's very common to have incentives as a way to entice the market to build even more. And the reason why they're so key comes back to financial feasibility. So we have the base requirement is kind of pushing as far as we can push on making sure you don't just stop development altogether, because we won't get new affordable units. We also won't get new market rate new units if you create your mandatory requirement to be so high that it's not financially feasible. And so what the incentives do is offset the cost of building even more affordable units beyond the mandatory that everyone has to build. So a permit fee reduction or being able to build less parking or slightly higher buildings is a way to offset the cost of getting even more affordable units. And we've heard a lot of community feedback that they want that option out there. They want even more units to get built. And so giving some financial incentives to developers that are effective and that the financial modeling shows they'd actually take and then build more units is desirable.
Ian,
Yeah,
are you
I
going to call
wasn't
on
sure.
somebody else?
Yeah, sure. I just was making sure that you were done there.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Alini, I think you're next, and then I have Cindy, David, Darcy.
Thanks, Ian. I've got a couple of questions, and I'm glad to see the potential raise in linkage fees. This is something that many of us pointed out during the East Central area planning process, that linkage fees for the city and county of Denver, as compared to peer cities, is pennies on the dollar. And if we are in a housing crisis, I'm a little concerned that these fees are still low. They don't represent the feasibility that you've indicated in your chart. You have a higher kind of, in green, you have a feasibility column, and then you have some information on how legally you could go even higher. So my first question is, why not go to the feasibility amount that you've indicated? And how did you determine the feasibility? Was that something that came out of a meeting with developers? Did you survey them? I mean, how did you do that economic analysis, if you will? So number one. And number two, what was the thought process between phasing it in over years when we've been so woefully behind in collecting or generating fees to build affordable housing?
Yeah, those are all really great questions. So I'll start with how we got to what's economically feasible. That was a long process of hiring a consultant who has a lot of expertise in both affordable housing and has worked on linkage fees and mandatory housing throughout the country. And doing a lot of modeling based on typical projects and land costs in Denver. But then also we did get feedback. It wasn't just one meeting, but we had interviews with developers. And as you know, the linkage fee, you can see in the chart, applies to a lot of different types of development. So industrial and the industrial market is very different than office market, for example. And so talking to people with a lot of experience in those areas and kind of testing the numbers is how we got to what is financially feasible. And then, as you can imagine, it's like a lot of interesting policy questions like this one. There's a vast array of opinions on what the right number should be and how hard to push it. So there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of input going into the numbers that we've proposed. The reason that some of the primary reasons, there's a lot of reasons that they're not just exactly at what's financially feasible and are generally, depending on which one you're looking at, often just a little bit lower, but in some cases more significantly lower. A huge one was that the impacts of COVID on the market have been huge. So we heard from so many stakeholders that they are struggling right now to make projects pencil and work, especially commercial and industrial. Industrial, there's extra concern around that one because we have so few jobs provided by industrial uses in Denver already, and it's a use that's already tempted to go out to the suburbs where there's more affordable land, and has also been hit by COVID, and concerned that especially, it's one of the reasons why the increases will be phased in, especially like one dramatic increase could have a really negative impact on development, and it would stop the construction of key uses that we need in Denver. So that's really what we're trying to balance. There's also a lot of things going on in the construction industry right now, like extraordinarily high cost of lumber, et cetera, that we're hearing a lot of feedback on. If you couple that with a dramatic increase in the linkage fee, it will have drastic impacts that could mean we lose out on the jobs and offices we need in Denver. So those are some of the reasons. I would point out though that just like the linkage fee we had before, there's always the opportunity to increase it in the future. You need a little time to see what the impacts are. So we need to let the phased increases come in. But we've seen this in a lot of peer cities. They often start with a much lower linkage fee, and the market adjusts and gets used to that over the years, and then they're able to gradually increase it. So we felt like a good balance for a starting point to start getting significantly more dollars. And then we'll continue to monitor in years to come.
Just kind of a follow-up question. Can we get the data sets of how you determined your financial feasibility study? Because that would be sort of helpful.
You bet. So the feasibility analysis is on the website.
Okay.
And
but the data, like the actual raw data sets, like did you do 10 meetings? Who did you talk to? Because it seems like a lot of, from our perspective, that CPD, because you typically work with a lot of developers, has a pretty good communication process with them. And I mean, they have had record profits despite COVID. So, you know, we know that the industry is doing well. It's not to, and that in fact gets back to our earlier discussion for commercial, perhaps adaptive reuse is a change that we need to be making so that commercial uses can be readapted more to residential or to a mix, because we have a lot of you know, shrinkages and leasing and, you know, vacancy rates across the country in commercial. But I mean, overall, the industry is doing well. And I keep hearing that it's not from CPD, but when we go out and look at, you know, profits, they're up. So I guess what we're asking for is increasing the linkage fee and increasing the amount of required affordability. You know, from 8% seems woefully low when you just through neighborhood agreements, or what do you call the good neighbor agreements, some of the things that come before council get 10%, get 12%. So it just seems like we're settling when we're in a midst of having a lot of unhoused neighbors and a lot of displacement. So phasing it in it may help the industry adapt, but what about the people who are in need?
Yeah, there's some great points in there. A couple responses I just would want to emphasize. I can't speak to what data you're looking at in terms of record profits, but what we can share is that we're specifically looking and hearing about the Denver market and what the future impacts of doing something like this could be, and just making sure we're striking a balance so that it isn't so drastic that it pushes all the development out of Denver to our pure areas, because we need the affordable units here too. But we are pushing for significantly more, and will apply to all development. So when you mentioned not just good neighbor agreements, but I think what you're referring to are actually what we would call a development agreement that are enforced by the city between a developer, and those are very different because they're negotiated as part of a rezoning. So the developer is actually getting more density, the ability to build more, and that it's much easier to leverage more units. That's one of the reasons why we have an incentive for slightly more height and getting more units. Also, you mentioned the 8%, and some of those agreements are up to 10 or 12%. The second option is for 12% with an average at 70% AMI. The 8% option is at 60% AMI, and very few deals that have been negotiated on recent rezonings have gone as deep as 60% AMI. Often it's just a small percentage of the units. And we've gotten really strong community feedback that it's very important to hit the 60% AMI level. So that's why that's one of the options. It's you don't get as much money at that level, you don't get as much rent. And so that's why the 8% is lower than the 12%. but we've heard a lot of community feedback that that is an okay trade-off because Denver needs to hit the 60% AMI. So I actually think what we're proposing is actually very much in line with the recent rezonings and agreements that have been coming through that you mentioned. I hear you. It often feels like it's not enough when our needs are so strong. But I think there is a lot in here that will be a lot more than what we're getting, and it will apply to every new development in Denver. Right now, all those agreements I just mentioned only apply to rezonings, which is about 5 to 8% of all the development happening. All the other development doesn't need a rezoning. They can just go and get a permit and build, and they now will have to build these affordable units as well.
Okay, I think what I'll do is I'll just follow up with an email to get the data and to get where you're getting that they're not having record profits, because we read it in the newspaper. So we just want to see where that's not happening, especially now that we're in 2022 versus 2020. So yeah, I can just do that and allow for some other folks to participate.
Sounds good.
Cindy?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for that very simple explanation. That really helps. First, I have a general statement, and then I have a question. The general statement is, we know people are moving from the east to the west in the US to the more arid land. So I know recently Councilwoman Ortega stopped a large project because she wanted to check and make sure that the sewer, sanitation, all of that could be handled at the plant that was closest to this development. Also, we've had lots of conversations in a watershed state about water. So my general statement is, in resources where I hope CPD is really stopping to look at that as all of these large developments come online. So then my question is, in the balance of all of this, I live in the Central East Business District, and within a quarter mile of this rapid transit development, and I'm noticing that the incentives are increased within a quarter mile. So the balance of existing housing or readapting existing housing versus tearing down and building new. Where in this plan have you built in the balance of that, especially in our high dense area, not to take away all of our existing housing?
That's a great question. So I want to be clear, like, most of the tools that are available and are effective, especially from looking at peer cities, around your issue that you're bringing up, which is trying to do more adaptive reuse, not scrape buildings and build new, is not going to be accomplished through a project like this. That's not what the scope of this project is, or, this is about getting more affordable units out of market rate development. There's a whole other conversation we could have, and a lot of tools around how do we try to make sure that as the market is building, whether it's affordable or market rate, it's encouraged not to scrape buildings. So I want to be clear, that's really not what this project is for. It's not to say that we agree with you. That's a very important goal, and there's a lot of conversation we need to have around that. And there's some really interesting ways the city can do more there. But we have looked for opportunities where we can within the scope of this project. So one that I would point out is we got a lot of feedback about concerns about single unit homes being scraped. And so we've, for the linkage fee, because when you're a small project like that, just one unit, you can't build a percentage of your units that's affordable because there's only one unit. And so you pay the linkage fee. We actually have proposed in this most recent draft to increase the linkage fee on larger units. That's not going to stop scrapes from happening, but it's a way we're trying to nod to the market, like, hey, we're trying to encourage you not to build don't scrape the existing affordable homes that are out there and build a much larger one, and trying to deter that a little bit by charging the higher linkage fee. So we're looking for those opportunities where we can, and then we'd be happy to follow up with you more on some of the other tools and other things that we're working on as a city. Right now, for example, we actually have a survey out to historic preservationists, architects, developers, all people who are familiar with trying to reuse existing buildings in Denver, asking them to help us identify where our codes might be getting in the way of adaptive reuse, as a first step to kind of understand where there might be barriers. Sometimes it actually can be really challenging financially to reuse an existing building, and it's more enticing to demo it. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at, because we agree with you. We want to try to reuse a lot of the stock that's already out there.
Well, my concern, Sarah, is in the next, evaluation period, the next 2 years after you pass this, will it be something like when, what were those things called? That building structure that you had the alley down the middle of the homes or of the multifamily homes.
Slot homes.
Thank you, slot homes. Will that kind of thing happen with this 2-year period, to where like Downing Street is a GMU3 area, and GMU3s are those possible areas to increase the height of the development from the existing single family home? Will that all change within that period of time, because developers come in and say, oh, this is an opportunity, we're going to go for it, we can make a lot more money? Or am I getting this mixed up in zoning code areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we don't know for sure exactly, where it might have the biggest impact, but yes, I think it's possible that there will be more construction in some areas, but you have to remember, like, what's driving a project is going to be a lot more than these requirements, or just the incentives that are available. And what we've actually seen in a lot of peer cities is that in the first, usually it's not 2 years, but the first year after something like this is passed, leading up to it, there might be even more applications coming in that want to get in before the new rules are in place.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's often actually the reverse. There'll be a slowdown because the market's adjusting to such a huge change in the economics of how development works. And so for the first year or two, we'd probably actually expect to see fewer developments in like the area you're talking about, like GMU3. And then as the market starts to readjust to these requirements within a year, then you'll start to see construction typically go back to where it was. From looking at a lot of our peer cities, these kinds of changes are not what's really driving why you're going to see more development or not. It's long-term. It's all the things we already have in Denver. Costs in construction and labor, whether there's a recession or not, interest rates and cap rates, and these key things in the real estate market are going to be really what's driving whether you would see, for example, more development happening in that GMU3 area.
There is one more factor though, Sarah. Right now, utility costs, increase evaluation of homes, all of those kinds of things are creating displacement in our neighborhood because they're getting very costly to live here. So it's pushing out people that wouldn't normally be selling. So you're going to get probably a number of lots together that people are going to be selling at the same time because they just can't afford it. And that creates incentive for a developer to come in and buy more lots together. I just see this happening in addition to past markets. And this timing just really concerns me that the fabric of a neighborhood is going to change very, very quickly before it's stopped with with something that doesn't have that balance built into it. I don't see the balance built into this. It really concerns me. The GMU3 seems to be an area that we shouldn't have a carte blanche. You can come in and do whatever you want in heights and density. Am I seeing GMU3 areas wrong that you can build up to what, 3-4 stories?
Yeah, so to be clear, we definitely wouldn't propose anywhere that you get carte blanche. You can just build everywhere. And the proposal in 3 areas that have existing 3-story districts would be that in exchange for more affordable units, you can go up to 4 stories.
4.
Yep, it would be up to 4. So, and I actually, this is one of those moments where if Annalise was here, she would know off the top of her head. I do not. I'd have to go look, and I'd be happy to either do that as we're chatting and see if I can get it to you by the end of the meeting, and if not, follow up after the meeting to clarify if it would apply in that GMU3 area that you're talking about.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah.
David, you're next.
Thank you. My name is David Pardo. I actually live in a Zocalo building that is mixed income. I also work for Zeppelin Development, so I literally live, how do we build stuff every single day and watch costs explode on a regular basis, 10% price increases on individual products month to month. I think this is great as a general thing. My biggest issue, and you brought it up, is that when you're building a building like the one I live in, which is studios, 1 bedrooms, and a few 2 bedrooms, it has a certain type of population that lives there, and these units cost a certain amount to build based on their size. But I mean, I know who lives in this building with me. None of us are particularly rich. We're all doing okay. The issue to me is, if I pull up Zillow and I look for what houses are for sale that were built in the last 3 years that are single family freestanding homes, the cheapest one in Denver right now that's not near the airport is over $1 million. And so, people talk about, okay, how do we fix, how do we reduce the amount of luxury housing? How do we increase the amount of affordable housing? The problem isn't me living in a 424 square foot studio that was finished 7 months ago. The problem is a 5,000 square foot house that somebody who obviously is making multiples of what I make is buying. Like when we build a mixed use building, like the one I live in, somebody has to pay the differential in rent. And that, for me as a market rate renter, means that my rent goes up a little bit. I don't mind that. That's fine. It's great to do that. My issue is, like, why can't we just hose the people who are, making tons of money? That seems like the way to go, is to charge exorbitant rates if somebody's going to be building, let's say, more than 3,000 square feet in the form of a single unit. And then an even more exorbitant rate if they, break 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. So that there is less incentive to tear down small existing naturally affordable housing, and at the same time stop development. Or better yet, instead of a developer building a 5,000 square foot home, maybe they build 2 2,500 square foot duplexes. They're probably not going to be cheap, but at least they're not only for the stratospherically rich. They're just for the couple that both have professional jobs.
Okay, and so is that, I'm not following, there's a question or more just.
The question is, why is it that, the linkage fees, the sense that I got from another document I saw is that the linkage fees are the same based on square footage, whether somebody is building a single unit dwelling or a 9-unit dwelling. And to me, it would make sense to have some sort of sliding scale specifically around maybe just single unit or single unit and 2-unit dwellings. If somebody's building a 4-plex, probably none of those units are going to be huge and like north of $1 million. But if somebody's building a single unit, they could be building a $2.5 million house. Like, why can't the city collect, if it's 5,000 square feet, I don't know, like $500,000 from them? Somebody who can afford a $2.5 million house can afford a $3 million house.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not doing that to raise money, and instead treating somebody who's building, let's say, a 4-plex with 4 studios the exact same as somebody who's building a mansion?
Right. Well, we're not charging the exact same because units over 1,600 square foot in size do get charged more.
Is that the only step up, or is there an additional step up at like twice that at 3,200 square feet or something?
That's the only one right now, but it is significant. So if you're under 1,600 square foot, it's at the time you get to the end of the 3-year escalation, you're at $4 per square foot, and for over 600 square foot, you're at $7.
Okay.
So we are trying to just encourage the smaller units that way.
That makes sense. I guess my only feedback then would be to add more steps. like that step up sounds good. Those rates, from what I understand about construction, working in the industry, sound reasonable and doable. But the idea that we can't step up again at 2,500 square feet and again at 4,000 and again at 6,000, so that people aren't tearing down houses in Hilltop and building like monstrously large 7,000 square foot mansions without like actually contributing to our housing crisis solutions.
Okay. Thank you, David. Darcy, you're next with your question.
Hi, yes, my question is, what impact has the marijuana industry played on driving the forces of the homes up? It's come to my attention, a couple of real estate brokers mentioned to me that the money can't go into banks, so they're buying up all of these homes and paying cash for them. And it's driving the houses up so that they can then turn around and make their use and have more access to the funds that are available and put them in banks. So what impact has that industry had on driving the houses up? And what has the city done to make that industry pay for some of the problems in linkage fees and homes, and reducing that, having some kind of offset where it benefits all of the homeowners in the community and all of the displaced people that own property? That's one question. And then I had another one, but if you could answer that one first, I have another one after that.
Sure. Jennifer, it's okay. I might point that one to you because I think you could talk a little bit about the money we already get from the marijuana industries.
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about our Affordable Housing Fund. The Affordable Housing Fund is a dedicated local funding source for affordable housing, as it is right there in the name. There are a few different sources that fund the Affordable Housing Fund, which in total generates about $30 million a year. One of those sources is one that was talked about quite a bit in Sarah's presentation, which is the linkage fee. But we also populate that fund with marijuana use tax dollars. So some of the taxation on marijuana, recreational marijuana use, actually does go to fund affordable housing in the city and county of Denver.
How much is that? What percentage of the money goes to fund that?
What percentage of the overall tax goes to the Affordable Housing Fund?
Correct.
We'll need to take that question as a follow-up.
Okay. Then the other one that I had was to understand when you put affordable housing into a development and you want to scatter these different units within this site, the whole project now is required to pay prevailing wages, which drives the cost of the project up. And that's why some of the developers don't want to have anything to do with it, because when I developed the project that I worked on, I didn't have to worry about prevailing wages. The contractor paid whatever they needed to pay to their workers to get this done. And the project came in at a more reasonable cost than my neighbor who built something and it cost $100,000 more due to the prevailing wages and all of these funds going in. So my question is there a way that you can prevent from adding prevailing wages for the entire project and just use it for those specific units that are being addressed?
Jennifer, do you know the answer to that question?
I don't, but I did write it down as a list of follow-up questions.
Okay, and let's see, what else did I have written down here? You have a linkage fee on from 1 to 9 units. If I'm building an accessory dwelling unit, do I have to pay a linkage fee?
No.
Not required on that project, okay. But anything from 1 up. And what is the what's the percentage of that linkage fee? I don't understand that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Could you clarify what you mean by percentage?
Well, you said a linkage fee. Is it a standard rate per door or standard rate per 1,000? What's that? I don't understand the linkage.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So it's it's a standard rate per square foot.
Per square foot. Okay. All right. Well, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, and then Gertie?
Thank you. Sarah, when somebody comes in for a rezoning that, for example, on multi-unit zoning usually requires a setback and when along the front of the property, and when somebody comes in and asks to rezone from MU to Main Street, which has no front setback requirement, they are gaining an additional square footage within the building that they can build. Has the city considered requiring them to put affordable housing in exchange for that additional development space that they're getting with that rezoning?
You know, we did do some preliminary financial modeling in the beginning of this project when we were looking at what are the incentives that are most effective. Because the way that it would work is like, if you don't have to have a setback anymore, it needs to be financially enticing that you'd actually choose that incentive to then build more affordable units. And based on modeling what's financially feasible and the amount of extra square footage you get, as well as just input from the development community, changes and the amount of setback and everything were small enough that it wasn't meaningful enough to really be an effective incentive. The kinds of changes that might be needed would have been like really drastic ones that we didn't feel like were part of the scope of this project, because you would need a lot of urban design and community input around like how much those buildings would change, because there'd be such an impact on the community and how they'd look and feel.
Thank you.
Ian, I don't know if Ian has a question or his hand is just up.
Yeah, I do have a question, and also we're just reaching the end of our meeting here, but my question has to do with like the types of units that are constructed. Having participated on this task force, there was a lot of evidence in the beginning from families to group living that people want multi-units, and that, constructing 2 to 3 bedrooms is like a big priority at the lower income spectrum and for families. And so I'm really wondering how that dials into this as a question for people.
Yeah, it's a great point, and something we've obviously heard a lot about too. And one thing we've also heard is that to truly be family friendly, because I think a lot of what's that is about is serving often households that have more than 1 or 2 people, which often means it's a family with people at different ages, and in particular children. So you've gotten a lot of feedback. It's not just larger units, it's also having amenities that make the project a family friendly, like a playground outside, for example. And so we have tried to integrate that in, like, for example, for the high impact projects I mentioned earlier that would have a negotiated agreement with the city. We already have, which we try to set guardrails around that. And one of them is that you can actually overall provide a lower percentage of units in exchange for getting the multi-bedroom units. Because of course, why they don't get built as much is because it costs more to build those units. And so acknowledging that cost trade-off, but also making sure that if you do that, it's not just that you're providing affordable 2 to 3 bedroom units, but that you also have the family amenities provided on your site as well.
There was also the developers too were also saying they like producing single units because they can charge more rent on them too, right? Like the overall cost per unit compared to what they could charge for a 3 bedroom, and they would get per person in a unit. So I just remember them bringing that up kind of early, that they like to go to the single rooms because they can make more money in the long term, and it's not exactly what the community needs. And so I'm glad that that component made it in, because it is at the top of my mind. I do see that we're at our time. There were many notes in here. I think some concerns from Nola Miguel with GS Coalition around equity. And I think I spoke with Nola earlier this week, and she's going to be producing a letter that I think we'll probably want to circulate for members to read too, with her concerns and land values and ensuring that units are also built in all communities, but you know, especially in those vulnerable for displacement. So that being said, Christine, do you want to wrap it up here?
Sure. I want to thank all three of you. I don't know if Laura's still here, but Laura, Sarah, and Jennifer for spending Saturday morning with us. As you know, there are many, many other questions. I've kind of bit my tongue on about 10, but I think that this was a great start, and I really appreciate your time today. I know you're planners and you're paid to put your thinking caps on and look at peer cities, which I keep wondering how you pick, but you're doing the best you can. The problem is it does sound a little planner speak when I think of all the money in CPD that maybe a fraction of that budget Laura talked about could be in host for building. So I'm hoping this is productive. I'm hoping this effort, the expanding housing affordability, really has a result. That's what I'm hoping. So thank you for coming today.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. I think that one of my takeaways from today is that we're going to try to get the equity task force conversation here. I did put a link in the chat earlier. It looks like several members that come to INC regularly are part of it. So I think that's great for the overall discussion.
Yes, and I just wrote to Laura's assistant that maybe I'm in the dark, but I can't put a PowerPoint in MailChimp. And I can't put a PowerPoint in this chat. I need a hyperlink. So we need to get these things put into hyperlinks, the presentations today, if that's possible. Okay.
Yep, we'll do that, Christine. This is Laura. I've been listening.
Thank you, Laura.
Yep, I saw the email. So we'll, Amy's probably not picking up the emails today, but we'll get her on that Monday morning.
Okay, thank you all.
Chris and Ian, I'm hoping that we can also get reports from the ADU improvement or whatever group as well, because I think the more information that all of us get on what's going on in both the affordability and the ADU revision committees, the better it is, the easier it is for people to understand what's going on.
That was just announced, so we probably have to wait till they have a meeting. And then the advanced equity and rezoning, as far as I know, just started in January. So these things are pretty new, and I agree we need to get some substance into the meetings on them as soon as
So I'll
possible.
just add the Christine's right, the ADUs in Denver, their first community task force meeting is this Thursday at 4 o'clock, and you can go to our website. Those are open to the public, and there's a lot of information there about how to engage in that project, in addition to advancing equity and rezoning, which you're right is a little further ahead.
Yeah, I think we need to do a content email with that link.
So Sarah, who on staff should we be connecting if we want to have these two projects come?
Why don't I send you guys an email with their contact info? I'll send you the project managers for both of those.
Wonderful.
And I can also send the link to the website.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks again for everyone joining us. Don't forget, I think it's this next month's elections. So we want to make sure people turn out.
Oh, you mean INC
elections? Yeah, INC
my
elections.
Primaries. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about INC elections, but also I think the caucus is Tuesday. So, be empowered.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Look for some more information. We'll try to collect all the questions that were